Welcome to Larkin-Gowan Insights, accountancy and business advice for all, a series that gives you bite-sized tips and guidance on tax, funding, legislation, reforms and much more. With case studies, business advisory and sector specials and even interviews, our team of experts are committed to helping you navigate the world of accounting and finance, with a variety of presenters from across our specialisms. So, let's get on with today's show.
Hello. Today we're talking about Rachel Reeves' fiscal announcement on 29th of July on VAT and independent schools. I'm Giles Kerkham. I'm joined by VAT specialist Gillian McGill. Gilly, can you give a brief overview of the government's announcement on taxation of independent schools and their fees?
Yeah, thanks, Giles. So we knew that this was coming. It was well trailed within the pre-election conversations that the Labour Party were having. We've commented on it earlier in the year and what we thought might be happening, and now we have at least some degree of certainty with the Chancellor's announcement earlier this week. We now know that the VAT application on school fees will be coming in definitely. We now know that that will be applicable from the 1st of January 2025, which is not one of the dates that we had previously anticipated this change coming in on. So that is going to be a bit of a challenge for most schools to manage. We have also got clarity that there will be anti-forestalling or anti-avoidance legislation so that fees paid on or after the 29th of July when this announcement was made, which are in respect of terms which are from the 1st of January 2025 onwards, those fees paid in advance will be subject to VAT. So any attempts to try to get those to remain VAT exempt will not be successful based on the draft legislation that we now have.
And Gilly, is 1st of January the only implementation date that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so 1st of January 2025 is the point at which VAT starts to be applied and that schools will need to start accounting for VAT on their fees. So they need to be mindful that they'll have to have registered in advance of that date. What's been said at the moment is that they shouldn't be trying to register ahead of the 30th of October 2024, which is when we have been told the budget will be taking place. So most schools who are not currently looking to register would be waiting for a period in November, December to put their VAT registration applications in. That doesn't mean you can't register early, though, if there's a good reason to do so.
And can you just remind us do we know more about which types of schools and services will be affected?
Yeah, we've had a little bit of clarity on that. We've had a definition in the draft legislation of what a private school is. It does seem to catch schools that will charge fees for the provision of education. So it's quite a broad definition. Specifically, it will include sixth form provision. So if you're a private sixth form provider, or indeed if you're a school that extends up to sixth form, then VAT will be applicable on those fees. We've had clarity, which we expected, that VAT won't be applied on nursery fees, though. So those will remain VAT exempt.
Mhm.
If you have a nursery setting within your school, that part of your school will remain VAT exempt. And we've also had some clarity on provision of education for pupils with special educational needs or disabilities. There had been discussion about this. It'd been a real cause of concern for schools and for families leading up to the election. And there'd been some suggestion from Rachel Reeves prior to the election that they would be a way that the Labour Party would look to protect those particular students. How that's actually come through in the legislation is that there will still be VAT on education for those pupils with SEND and who have an education healthcare plan assessment in place for them. But what will happen is that the pupils whose EHCP is being fully funded by a local authority, who has agreed in their EHCP that that child needs to be in a private school to meet their SEND needs, those fees with the VAT on them that are paid by the local authority, the VAT will be fully recoverable by the local authority. So nil cost for that provision. What that won't help, though, are those children who have either an EHCP that doesn't necessarily specify that particular private school, or children who've got special needs that haven't yet been able to secure an EHCP. So for those children, there still will be VAT to pay on school fees.
So the school charges VAT.
Yeah,
If it's to a parent, they're not going to recover it. It's to a
exactly.
local authority, they will be able to recover. So it's broadly
Yeah,
neutral. Yeah.
yeah.
But for the school, they're always charging you. Okay. Thank you. While we're still on financial impact,
Mm.
how will the introduction of VAT impact the cost to parents?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's going to vary, you know, largely from school to school. However, I think as a rule of thumb, most of us are estimating an increase would be required to fees of somewhere around 15%, 15%, because the schools that are now VAT registered or VAT registering will be able to start recovering VAT on their costs that they weren't able to in the past. So there won't be, for most schools, a pure 20% increase on fees just because of this VAT change, because there will be some reduction in their cost base. That won't be a full reduction though, because of course the largest cost for schools is salary cost, the provision of their staff. That doesn't bear VAT. So there will be an increase. I wouldn't expect it to be the full 20% though for the majority of schools.
And you haven't mentioned business rates exemptions.
No, I haven't. You're right.
Can you just throw that in the mix?
So something else that was trailed but hadn't been definitely confirmed until this week was the removal of business rates charity relief for private schools. So again, that's going to vary what the financial impact of that is by school. For some, that might actually be a bigger issue than the VAT changes, depending on their particular profile. And that's why it's important that schools take individual and personalised advice on both the VAT and the rates implications.
What about boarding fees and other related services?
Yeah, so again, that was another area that was subject to quite a lot of discussion leading up to the election. The legislation that we now have confirms that boarding fees will also be subject to VAT. What has been carved out, though, and kept as exempt or retaining its previous VAT treatment will be things which are deemed closely related to the supply of the education. So, provision of books, provision of school trips will retain their same VAT treatment. Catering is going to be an interesting one, because catering, say, in the dining hall at a lunchtime will retain its previous VAT exempt treatment. But if you've got pupils who are boarding, you're going to have to feed them. And that food will be linked to their standard rated boarding. So there's still some areas of sort of grey here as well that need to be thought through.
Just while we're on boarding, what about state boarding schools? There's not many, but there are
No,
locally to us.
yeah, you're right. So state boarding has been specifically excluded from this change, so that will remain as it currently is.
I'm now going to sort of move on to sort of what actions
Mm,
schools might take. So I'm just
yeah.
going to say, just first of all, what steps would an independent school take now in the short term to comply? But then perhaps just more sort of longer term, what strategies they might think about to mitigate financial impact?
So right now, hopefully, most schools, if not all, have already gone through the basic checks that have been talked about previously. So checking that you're able to charge VAT on your fees and making sure that your prices as advertised are stated as VAT exclusive or plus VAT, so that you can actually put VAT on top of the fees. Hopefully that's already been done. I think the next thing that schools need to be doing right now is communicating with their families, if they haven't already, about what this will mean for them and what this hopefully will mean with respect to fees increases that will have already been modelled by the schools, so they know whether they're going to have to increase fees and by how much. The problem we've got with this 1st January 2025 implementation date is that most schools require a term's notice to be given before children can be removed, and obviously we've kind of lost that now, because the first term, the autumn term, is the next term, and full term's notice
But
can't be
also
given.
in practice, parents don't want to take their kids out.
No, exactly. Particularly if they're a really important stage of their education, leading up to exams or something. They don't want to be removing their children. So the other thing that schools need to be thinking about now is having conversations with their accounting systems providers to make sure that those systems are going to be able to deal with VAT. Now, there's only a small handful of main providers of accounting systems to the sector, and they are on top of this, but you need to start those discussions to make sure that you're in the line to be getting some updates and or training or whatever it is you need to get your accounting system VAT compliant. Not forgetting that once you're VAT registered, you need to be making tax digital compliant, so you need to be able to submit VAT returns in a digitally compliant way. Also, you need to be, if you aren't already, starting to record the VAT that is incurred on expenditure. Schools that are not VAT registered currently will have typically just been recording costs as a gross amount, because they can't recover the VAT anyway, so it made no difference whether it was £100 or £120. But from the point at which you're VAT registered, you're going to be able to recover some of that £20. So you need to be making sure that, again, that your systems and your staff are able to record net plus VAT to get your gross amount, so that you've got a chance of recovering the VAT that you incur on your costs. So that needs to be thought about now, because once you're registered, not only will you be able to recover VAT on costs going forwards, but you'll also be able to recover some of your pre-registration VAT. And we're in that period now, we're in that hot zone now. In 6 months leading up to being VAT registered, you need to start recording the VAT on your purchases so you can recover
How far
it.
back can you go?
So you can go back 6 months for services, which are things you can't touch. And you can go back 4 years for goods, which are
So is it the
things you
earlier the
can't touch.
better to register?
Yeah. Well, that depends, because as soon as you're registered, you're going to have to start charging VAT. And you might well have some income now that you would have to charge VAT on, and you'll have to start doing that as soon as you're registered.
It's talk to an advisor, isn't it?
Definitely. So we've got a broad set of rules that apply across a wide sector, where there is a great deal of variety of individual circumstances within that sector. It's very difficult to provide broad brush advice. It's going to need to be specific to each school's individual circumstances. It may be that you are, let's say, contemplating a very large capital spend over this summer holiday period, which, is typically a time when work is done. And you might think, is it worth registering now so that I can recover at least some of that VAT? And in which case you need to be taking some advice to get that clarified.
This is compliance. We've seen lots of talk in the press about with people with ideas about early payment to mitigate some of the VAT impact. Are there any strategies like that work that you would recommend?
I think the time for doing those sorts of payment advance schemes has gone. It's quite clear from the draft legislation that the 29th of July 2024 was a hard cut-off date for things like that to really be contemplated. If you had thought about perhaps further publicising your existing fees in advance scheme, months ago, before the 29th of July, we're fairly confident that any payments that were received by the school ahead of the 29th of July that were structured in the appropriate way to make it clear that that payment in advance was specifically linked to education provision and which terms it covered. We're pretty confident that those will be safe as the legislation stands at the moment. It could be legislated against further, but for now, those seem to be fairly safe. If you, as a school, suggested to parents they might like to think about doing this, but they didn't actually, pay the money until the 29th of July or later, I'm afraid they will be caught and those amounts will be subject to VAT where they relate to terms on or after the 1st of January 2025.
Do you foresee failure of independent schools?
I mean, again, there's been talk about this. I think it can't be ruled out entirely. I think for some schools that are particularly small and perhaps are aimed at a particular demographic of children or needs, it is a possibility, Giles, I think. Those that feel that they're at risk, as ever, don't bury your head in the sand. Take advice early. It might not be as bleak as it seems. And if it is, then there are better ways of dealing with closure and worse ways of dealing with closure, and taking advice and having somebody to sit alongside you during that process will help matters go more smoothly.
So that's about schools, but parents, is there any advice you can now give to parents who are concerned about the increased costs?
The really strongest piece of advice I can give is to be very aware that there will likely be a lot of aggressive marketing of schemes that will seek to in some way avoid and or make the VAT recoverable for you. So the classic one that is already being discussed is to get your company or employer to pay the school fees for you so that they can recover the VAT on your behalf. These do not work. I cannot be clearer about this. They don't work. Don't do it. Don't start engaging in anything that could be potentially fraudulent. It's not worth it.
Okay, we're coming towards the end of our time now, Gilly. What should I have asked you that I haven't?
I think the other thing to think about is those schools that have got trading subsidiaries. Those trading subsidiaries are probably already VAT registered. Yeah, so those schools are in a better position, I guess. They're more prepared. They know about VAT. They know how it works. They've probably got systems and staff that can deal with it. They might want to look at group registering the trading sub with the school, but those transactions between school and trading sub will need some close scrutiny and thinking about now that we've got this change, definitely. Other than that, Giles, no, I think you've covered everything nicely.
If you don't group register, if you just do a second registration, you end up with some VAT
you end up with having to charge VAT between the two entities, and you could end up with some VAT leakage that you might otherwise avoid. So yeah, it needs some thinking about. Yeah.
Thank you, Gilly, for shedding light on this topic so promptly. It's clear that there's going to be significant implications for independent schools and for parents and for the whole balance of education in this country going forward. If anyone listening needs advice, please do get in touch with Larkin Gowan. Our details are in the show notes.
Thank you for joining us for Larkin Gowan Insights, Accountancy and Business Advice for All. Don't forget, you can find more information about today's topic and more about how our team of experts can help you in your business by visiting our website, larkin-gowan.co.uk. Join us again next time for another fascinating insight into the world of accounting and finance.